The rain hammered against the windows of our suburban Denver home that October evening, each drop feeling like a countdown to something inevitable. The storm had been building all day, dark clouds gathering over the Rocky Mountains like an omen of the tempest about to break inside our supposedly perfect life. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the stack of credit card statements spread before me like tarot cards predicting financial doom. The marble countertop felt cold beneath my palms as my hands trembled, calculating the numbers for the third time, hoping desperately I'd made a mistake. $28,000 in debt. Money I never spent, on things I never bought, at places I'd never been. The kitchen around me was a monument to our success, or what I'd thought was our success. Stainless steel appliances that gleamed under the pendant lights, custom cabinets that had cost more than most people's cars, a wine refrigerator stocked with bottles Marcus claimed were investments. Now, looking at these statements, I wondered if any of it was real or if our entire lifestyle was built on a foundation of lies and stolen money. Claire, you're being dramatic again. Marcus's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade wrapped in silk. He stood in the doorway, his 6-foot frame filling the space with the kind of presence that had once made me feel protected, but now felt intimidating. His designer suit was still immaculate despite the 12-hour day at his investment firm. Armani, probably, chosen to project success to clients who trusted him with their life savings. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. His smile that same charming one that had captivated me 15 years ago when we'd met at a charity fundraiser in Cherry Creek. But now, under the harsh kitchen lights, with shadows playing across his angular features, it looked predatory, the smile of a hunter who'd found his prey. Dramatic? I held up the visa statement, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, there's a charge here for $3,500 at some high-end restaurant in Vegas. I've never been to Vegas, with you. He loosened his tie, that practiced gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was about to deflect. It was a business dinner. You know how these client meetings go. On our anniversary, you told me you were in Chicago for the Morrison account. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled only by the sound of rain against glass and the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my parents, who'd been so proud that their daughter was marrying such a successful man. Outside, the autumn wind howled through the bare branches of our maple tree, the same tree where we'd carved our initials 12 years ago when we first bought this house. The neighborhood had been younger then, full of families with small children and dreams of suburban prosperity. Now most of our neighbors had moved on to bigger houses, better neighborhoods, leaving us surrounded by for sale signs and the ghosts of what we'd thought our life would become. Back then, I thought we were building something permanent, something real. I'd imagined Marcus and me growing old together in this house, watching our children play in the backyard we'd spent so much time landscaping, hosting Thanksgiving dinners in the dining room, where we'd hung family photos and displayed the china we'd received as wedding gifts. Now I wondered if any of it had ever been genuine, or if I'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion while Marcus built a different life entirely. Marcus walked to the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of his expensive craft beer, and twisted off the cap with a sharp hiss. You know what your problem is, Claire? You've never understood the pressures of my job, the entertainment, the networking. It's all part of building our future. Our future? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What future, Marcus? We can barely afford the mortgage on this place, and you're spending money we don't have on mysterious business dinners. He took a long sip, his blue eyes studying me, with the same calculating look he used when analyzing stock portfolios. Maybe that's the real problem here. Maybe you're not cut out for this life. Something cold settled in my stomach. What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe we want different things. Maybe we always have. He set the bottle down with deliberate precision. You knew who I was when you married me. You knew I was ambitious, That I had goals beyond this little domestic bubble you've created. Little domestic bubble? My voice cracked. I gave up my teaching career to support your dreams. I moved 3 times for your promotions. I've been managing our household, our social obligations, everything so you could focus on your precious career. And I've provided for you. This house, your car, the lifestyle you enjoy, none of that comes free, Claire. The way he said my name, like it was a burden he carried, like I was some tiresome obligation he'd grown weary of managing, made something snap inside me. The sound echoed in the kitchen, bouncing off the surfaces we'd chosen together. The backsplash. We'd debated for weeks. The fixtures I'd thought represented our shared taste. Everything in this room was a lie. A stage set for a marriage that had apparently been over for months while I played the role of the oblivious wife. I stood up, the bar stool scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The sudden movement made my head spin. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, too nauseated by what I was discovering to think about food. Provided for me? Marcus, we're drowning in debt. This house is mortgaged to the hilt. My car is 7 years old with 160,000 miles on it, and I haven't bought myself new clothes in 2 years because every penny goes to maintaining your image. Your image, Marcus, not ours. He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else, a perfume I didn't recognize. It was floral, younger than anything I wore, with notes of jasmine and vanilla that seemed to mock the practical, understated fragrances I'd chosen over the years. The scent clung to his shirt collar, his jacket, evidence of intimate moments I hadn't been part of. My heart hammered against my ribs as pieces of a puzzle I'd been avoiding began clicking into place with horrible clarity. The late nights that had become routine. The weekend business trips to cities I'd never been invited to visit. The way he'd started showering immediately when he came home, claiming he needed to wash off the stress of the day. The sudden interest in working out. The new cologne. The subtle but expensive updates to his wardrobe. I'd attributed it all to his professional success, his desire to project confidence and authority in the competitive world of investment management. I'd been so stupid, so willfully blind. You want to know the truth? His voice was dangerously quiet. I've been thinking about this for a while now. About us. About whether this marriage is really working. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time we both admitted that we've grown apart. Maybe it's time to consider our options. I stared at him. This man I'd shared a bed with for 15 years, who knew how I liked my coffee, who'd held me through my mother's funeral, who'd promised to love me through better and worse. Now he stood before me like a stranger wearing my husband's face. Options, I repeated, tasting the word like poison. Divorce will set you free, Claire. He said it so casually, like he was suggesting we change the cable package. You could go back to teaching. Find someone who appreciates your simplicity. Someone who doesn't challenge you to grow. The kitchen felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white against the dark granite. You want a divorce? I want us both to be happy. And honestly, I don't think we make each other happy anymore. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of satisfaction that told me this wasn't a sudden realization. This was planned, calculated. And that perfume on his clothes, those mysterious charges, the late nights and weekend business trips, it all suddenly made terrible sense. There's someone else. It wasn't a question. He had the grace to look away for a moment. Claire, it's not that simple. Yes or no, Marcus? Is there someone else? When he looked back at me, the mask was completely off. The charming smile was gone, replaced by something cold and impatient. Yes, there is. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt something inside me break, but it wasn't my heart. It was something deeper. It was the last strand of the person I used to be, the woman who made excuses for him, who believed his lies, who thought love was supposed to hurt this much. How long? My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Does it matter? It matters to me, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. 8 months, maybe 9. 9 months. While I was worrying about our finances, clipping coupons and buying generic brands to stretch our grocery budget, planning our anniversary dinner at a restaurant I couldn't really afford, trying to save our marriage with romantic gestures funded by credit cards that were already maxed out, he was building a new life with someone else. Someone who probably didn't worry about money because she had no idea where it was really coming from. Someone who saw Marcus as successful and generous and exciting. Someone who hadn't lived through the gradual erosion of dreams and promises that characterized our marriage. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, so perfectly executed that I almost admired its precision. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake born of opportunity. This was calculated, planned, systematic. This was the work of someone who'd been evaluating his options and preparing his exit strategy while his wife made excuses for his absence and tried to hold together a marriage that had been dead for months. What's her name? Claire. This isn't helping. What's her name? Jessica. She works at the firm. Of course she did. I'd met her at the Christmas party last year. A blonde 20-something with perfect teeth and a master's degree from Northwestern. The kind of polished, professional woman who made partner track look effortless. She'd complimented my dress, a simple black cocktail dress I'd bought on sale at Nordstrom Rack, and asked about my work with genuine seeming interest. We'd talked for 20 minutes about education policy and the challenges of teaching in underfunded schools, and she'd seemed so sincere, so friendly. She'd smiled at me like we were friends while she was sleeping with my husband. The memory made my stomach churn, bile rising in my throat as I realized how perfectly they'd played their roles that evening. Marcus introducing us casually, Jessica's warm handshake and enthusiastic conversation. The way they'd barely interacted in my presence while conducting a full-blown affair behind my back. How many other people at that party had known? How many colleagues and clients and supposed friends had watched me make small talk with my husband's mistress while they exchanged knowing glances and inside jokes? So this is how it ends, I said, more to myself than to him. 15 years, and this is how it ends. It doesn't have to be ugly, Claire. We can be civilized about this. You'll get half of everything, of course. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts. You'll be fine. Half of everything. Half of nothing was still nothing, and we both knew it. But something in his tone, the way he said it like he was doing me a favor, sparked something new inside me. Something that felt suspiciously like rage. You're right, I said quietly. Divorce will set me free. He looked surprised by my sudden agreement. I'm glad you see it that way. I was worried you'd make this difficult. I almost laughed. Difficult. As if I was the one who'd been living a lie for 9 months. As if I was the one who'd betrayed every promise we'd made to each other. Oh, Marcus, I said, and for the first time that evening, I smiled. I wouldn't dream of making this difficult. The next morning, I sat in my car outside the offices of Henderson & Associates, watching the Denver skyline catch the early sunlight, while my world continued to crumble around me. The building was one of those gleaming downtown towers that projected success and power, all glass and steel and ambition reaching toward the sky. It was the kind of place Marcus would have admired, the physical manifestation of the success he'd always chased. My hands shook as I dialed the number I'd looked up at 3 a.m, unable to sleep after Marcus had moved his belongings to the guest room with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. He'd packed like he was going on a business trip, folding his clothes with practiced precision, gathering his toiletries and electronics with the same methodical approach he brought to everything else. No emotion, no regret, no acknowledgement that he was dismantling 15 years of shared life with the casualness of checking out of a hotel. I'd watched from the doorway as he worked, noting which things he chose to take and which he left behind. The books we'd bought together, left on the shelves. The photos of our honeymoon in Tuscany, abandoned on the dresser. The watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, carefully placed in his travel case. The symbolism was clear. Anything connected to our shared history was expendable. Anything that projected success and prosperity was essential. Henderson and Associates, this is Sarah. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Henderson, please. It's regarding a divorce case. Of course. May I ask who referred you? I thought about the online reviews I'd read until sunrise, the stories of scorned spouses who'd walked away with everything. Research. I did my own research. As I made the appointment, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me had dark circles under her green eyes, evidence of the sleepless nights that had become routine. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, unwashed and unkempt in a way that would have horrified her a week ago. Her face was pale with shock and exhaustion, cheekbones more prominent than they'd been in years, thanks to the stress, diet of coffee and adrenaline that had replaced regular meals. But there was something new there, too. Something I hadn't seen in years of looking in mirrors and seeing only what I wasn't. Not young enough, not successful enough, not exciting. Enough to hold my husband's interest. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I saw something that looked like strength, determination. Marcus thought he'd won. He thought he'd planned the perfect exit strategy, lined up his replacement, prepared his escape route with the strategic thinking that had made him successful in business. What he didn't know was that while he was busy playing house with Jessica, I'd been paying attention. I'd been watching, learning, noticing things he thought I was too simple to understand. I'd been keeping records. Not intentionally at first, just the careful bookkeeping of a woman trying to understand why the numbers never seemed to add up, why there was never enough money despite Marcus's supposedly successful career. But what had started as confusion had evolved into documentation, and what had started as documentation was about to become evidence. 3 weeks later, I sat across from David Henderson in his downtown office, a fortress of mahogany and leather that screamed success loud enough to be heard in the mountains. The 50-something attorney had silver hair, sharp eyes behind expensive glasses, and a reputation for leaving opposing counsel in financial ruins. His consultation fee alone had cost me $800, money I'd taken from our joint savings account before Marcus could freeze it, one of several preemptive strikes I'd made based on advice from online divorce forums. The office itself was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling law books, framed degrees from Harvard and Yale, photographs of Henderson with governors and senators and Supreme Court justices. Awards and accolades covered one wall, testimonials from grateful clients covered another. This was a man who didn't just practice law, he weaponized it. Mrs. Donovan, Henderson leaned back in his chair, studying the folder I'd presented him, with the focused attention of a general reviewing battle plans. I have to say, in 25 years of practice, I've rarely seen a client come this prepared to an initial consultation. Most people in your situation are too emotional to think strategically. They want revenge, but they haven't thought about what form that revenge should take or how to achieve it most effectively. The folder contained everything I'd been documenting for the past 3 weeks. Bank statements going back 2 years, credit card records with suspicious charges highlighted. In yellow, photographs I'd taken of documents from Marcus's home office, emails I'd printed from his laptop when he forgot to log out, phone records that showed patterns of communication with numbers I didn't recognize, and a detailed timeline of his lies that read like a masterclass in deception. What had started as heartbreak had evolved into something far more methodical. I'd approached this investigation with the same systematic thinking I'd once applied to lesson planning, breaking down complex problems into manageable components, gathering evidence, building arguments supported by facts rather than emotion. I'm a former teacher, Mr. Henderson. Research is what I do. When I don't understand something, I study it until I do. I've spent the last 3 weeks learning everything I can about divorce law, asset protection, forensic accounting, and marital misconduct. I've read every case study I could find, watched every relevant YouTube video, joined every online forum where people discuss financial deception in marriage. I wanted to understand not just what Marcus did, but how to prove it and what remedies might be available. He smiled, the kind of smile that probably cost his opponents millions. Indeed you do. Now, let's talk about what we're dealing with here. Your husband's infidelity is clearly documented, but Colorado is a no-fault divorce state. The affair itself won't necessarily impact the asset division. My heart sank. So he gets to cheat and still walk away with half of everything? Not necessarily. The key is whether marital assets were used to support the affair, and whether there's been any financial misconduct. Based on what I'm seeing here, he flipped through the papers, his expression growing more interested. Your husband has been very creative with your joint finances. I leaned forward. What do you mean? These credit card charges you've highlighted. The restaurants, hotels, gifts. If we can prove these were related to his affair, we can argue for dissipation of marital assets. The court doesn't look kindly on spouses who use joint funds to finance their infidelity. But that's just the beginning, isn't it? I pulled out a separate folder, one I'd been hesitant to share. There's more. Henderson raised an eyebrow. Oh? Marcus works in investment management, high net worth clients, complex portfolios. But some of his recent deals, I spread out the documents I'd found in his home office. I think there might be some irregularities. The attorney's expression grew sharp as he examined the papers. Client statements, investment summaries, internal emails I'd photographed with my phone. I'd spent hours learning to understand the financial jargon, watching YouTube videos on investment fraud, reading articles about Ponzi schemes and embezzlement. Mrs. Donovan, where exactly did you get these? They were in his office at home. He's been bringing work home for months, leaving it all over his desk. I got curious about what was keeping him so busy. That was a lie. I'd been systematically photographing everything in his office for 2 weeks, waiting for nights when he was out with Jessica, using a small camera I'd bought online. But Henderson didn't need to know that. And you understand what you're looking at here? I understand enough. Look at this client, Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald. Marcus has her listed as investing in a high-yield bond fund, but the statements show her money going into Marcus's personal trading account. And here, I pointed to another document. Mr. Robert Chen's retirement fund. Marcus told him it was in municipal bonds, but it's actually in high-risk cryptocurrency investments. Henderson was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled, as he studied the evidence. Mrs. Donovan, what you're describing could constitute investment fraud. Securities violations. This goes beyond divorce law. I know. If these allegations are true, your husband could face criminal charges, significant ones. I know. He looked at me with new respect. What exactly are you hoping to achieve here? I met his gaze steadily. Justice. Marcus told me divorce would set me free. He was right, but not in the way he thought. I want him to face consequences for everything he's done. To me, to his clients, to everyone he's lied to. And you understand? That if we pursue this course, there's no going back? This isn't just about asset division anymore. This is about potentially sending your husband to prison. The weight of that statement settled over me. Prison. Marcus, in his designer suits and perfect hair, behind bars. A year ago, the thought would have horrified me. Now, it felt like justice. He made his choices, Mr. Henderson. Now I'm making mine. The attorney smiled, and this time, there was something predatory in it. Very well. Let's discuss my retainer. That afternoon, I drove to the suburban Starbucks where I'd arranged to meet my friend Sarah, the only person I'd told about the divorce. She was already there when I arrived, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, her nurse's scrubs traded for jeans and a sweater. We'd been friends since college, and she'd watched my marriage deteriorate with growing concern over the years. You look different, she said as I sat down with my latte. Better, more focused. I feel different, like I'm finally waking up after years of sleepwalking. And the lawyer? How did it go? I glanced around the crowded cafe, making sure no one was listening. Better than I hoped. Sarah, I think Marcus is in serious trouble. Not just with the divorce, but legally. Her eyes widened. What kind of trouble? I told her about the investment, irregularities, the client funds, the suspicious transactions. As I spoke, I watched her expression change from surprise to concern to something that looked like fear. Claire, this is big. If you're right about this, if Marcus is really defrauding his clients, he is, I'm sure of it. But how could you possibly know enough about finance to? I've been learning. God, Sarah, I've been learning things I never thought I'd need to know. Investment terminology, securities law, forensic accounting. Did you know there are entire courses online about detecting financial fraud? She stared at me. You've been planning this. For how long? I thought about the nights I'd spent hunched over my laptop, the books I'd ordered on Amazon, the fake profiles I'd created to access financial forums and legal databases. Since the night he told me about Jessica, since I realized that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. Claire, you need to be careful. If Marcus finds out what you're doing, he won't. He thinks I'm heartbroken and helpless. He expects me to cry and beg and make this easy for him. He has no idea what I'm capable of. What you're capable of. Sarah's voice was quiet. What are you capable of, Claire? I met her eyes. Whatever it takes. The next week, I put my plan into motion. Marcus had moved in with Jessica. Apparently, her downtown condo was more suitable for their love nest than our suburban home. He'd been coming by the house periodically to collect his things, always with that same patronizing smile, acting like he was doing me a favor by being civil. I've been thinking about what you said, I told him during one of these visits. He was in his office, packing up files and personal items, about the divorce setting me free. He looked up from a box of books, his expression cautious. Oh? I think you're right. I think we both deserve to be happy. And I don't want this to be ugly. Relief washed over his face. I'm glad to hear you. Say that, Claire. I was hoping we could handle this maturely. I'd like to try. In fact, I was wondering if we could work out some of the details ourselves before we get the lawyers too involved. Save us both some money. He set down the book he was holding. What kind of details? Well, the financial stuff. I know you understand money better than I do. Maybe you could put together a summary of our assets, our debts, what we each might expect to walk away with? The request was perfectly reasonable, exactly what a naive wife might ask of her financially savvy husband. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd already documented every asset, every debt, every hidden account. I knew more about our financial situation than he thought possible. I suppose I could do that, he said slowly. It would probably be helpful to have everything laid out clearly. That would be wonderful. And Marcus, I want you to know that I don't blame you for falling in love with someone else. These things happen. I just want us both to move forward with dignity. The lies came so easily now. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined manipulating anyone, let alone my own husband. But 6 months ago, I'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Now I understood that sometimes the only way to get justice was to take it yourself. Thank you, Claire. That means a lot to me. As he returned to his packing, I noticed him glance at his computer, where he'd been working on some client files. His laptop was open, logged in, unattended. I'm going to make some coffee, I said. Would you like some? That would be great. I went to the kitchen, started the coffee maker, and waited exactly 3 minutes. Then I walked back to the office, where Marcus was in the bathroom down the hall. His laptop sat open on the desk, screensaver off, all his files accessible. I'd practiced this moment dozens of times. I knew exactly what I was looking for and where to find it. My phone was already in camera mode as I quickly photographed the screen, scrolling through client files, transaction records, and email correspondence. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. By the time Marcus returned, I was sitting in the chair across from his desk, scrolling through my own phone innocently. "Coffee's almost ready," I said with a smile. "Perfect." He sat back down at his laptop, completely unaware that I'd just documented enough evidence to destroy his career. That night, alone in the house that no longer felt like home, I uploaded the photos to my secure cloud storage and added them to the growing file I was building. Henderson had been right. What I was uncovering went far beyond a simple divorce case. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me. He was cheating his clients out of millions. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. The breakthrough came on a gray December morning when I was least expecting it. I was at the grocery store, mindlessly pushing my cart through aisles that seemed too bright and too loud, when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Donovan, this is Eleanor Fitzgerald. I believe you know my name." My heart stopped. Eleanor Fitzgerald, one of Marcus's clients, the elderly woman whose retirement funds I'd discovered were being misappropriated. I ducked into an empty aisle, my pulse racing. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, how did you get my number?" "I have my ways, dear. I'm 83 years old, but I'm not senile. I've been doing some investigating of my own, and your name keeps coming up in connection with Marcus Donovan. I believe we need to talk." An hour later, I sat in Eleanor's elegant Cheeseman Park home, a Victorian gem filled with antiques and the kind of old money sophistication that Marcus had always coveted. Eleanor herself was sharp-eyed and perfectly dressed, with white hair styled in a neat chignon and intelligence that radiated from her weathered face. "I've been suspicious of your husband for months," she said, pouring tea from a delicate china service. "The returns on my investments haven't matched what he's been telling me, and when I asked for detailed statements, he kept giving me excuses. How do you know who I am?" "Dear, I used to run a private investigation firm before I retired. Old habits die hard. When I started looking into Marcus's background, I naturally looked into his personal life as well. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that his wife had recently retained David Henderson. I nearly dropped my teacup. You investigated me? Just a routine background check, but it told me everything I needed to know. A devoted wife doesn't hire Denver's most aggressive divorce attorney unless she has good reason. And a woman doesn't go from being a high school teacher to understanding complex financial fraud overnight without powerful motivation. She knew, somehow, this stranger had seen through my careful facade and understood exactly what I was doing. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, I don't know what you think you know. I think you know that your husband has been stealing from his clients, myself included. I think you've been gathering evidence, probably for weeks. And I think you could use an ally who has resources and experience you don't." The directness of her approach was both terrifying and liberating. After months of careful pretense, someone was finally acknowledging the truth out loud. "Why would you want to help me?" Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because Marcus Donovan has stolen over $200,000 from my retirement account. Because he's preying on elderly clients who trust him with their life savings. And because I've spent my entire career putting criminals like him behind bars." Over the next 2 hours, Eleanor laid out everything she'd discovered. Marcus's scheme was more sophisticated than I'd realized. He was running what amounted to a Ponzi scheme, using new client investments to pay returns to existing clients while skimming massive amounts for himself. The money wasn't just funding his lifestyle and his affair. It was disappearing into offshore accounts and cryptocurrency investments that only he controlled. "How many clients are affected?" I asked. "At least 12 that I've identified so far. Total losses approaching $3 million. Most of them are elderly. Many are widows who trusted Marcus with their husband's life insurance payouts." The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just about my failed marriage anymore. It was about dozens of people whose lives Marcus had destroyed for his own gain. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Access. You still have access to his home office, his computer, his files. I need you to get me copies of everything. Client lists, transaction records, correspondence. Everything you can find. I've already been documenting what I can, but if he catches me, he won't. Men like Marcus never suspect their wives of being capable of real deception. He thinks you're too simple, too trusting, too broken by his betrayal to be a threat. Use that assumption against him." That night, I implemented Eleanor's plan. Marcus was out of town on a business trip. At least, that's what he'd told me. More likely, he was with Jessica at some romantic getaway funded by his client's money. The house was empty, dark, and filled with the echoes of a life that had turned out to be completely fraudulent. I worked systematically through his office, photographing every document, copying every file, accessing every password-protected folder. Eleanor had given me a list of specific items to look for, and her investigative experience showed she knew exactly what evidence would hold up in court. But it was in Marcus's desk drawer, hidden behind a false back panel, that I found the most damning evidence of all. A handwritten ledger that detailed every fraudulent transaction, every stolen dollar, every lie he'd told to cover his tracks. In his own handwriting, Marcus had documented his crimes with the thoroughness of a man who never expected to be caught. As I photographed each page, my hands shaking with adrenaline, I realized that Marcus had sealed his own fate. His arrogance, his certainty that he was smarter than everyone around him, had led him to create a perfect record of his own guilt. The final piece of the puzzle came 3 days later, when Eleanor called with news that changed everything. "I've been in contact with the other victims," she said. "Claire, they want to file a class action lawsuit. They want to go to the police, the SEC, the district attorney's office. But they need someone on the inside, someone who can provide evidence that even Marcus can't explain away. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to be brave. I'm asking you to testify against your husband, to provide evidence that will put him in prison for a very long time. I'm asking you to help us get justice for all the people he's hurt." I thought about Eleanor's retirement fund, about the widows who'd trusted Marcus with their life savings, about all the people whose golden years had been destroyed by his greed. I thought about Jessica, probably planning a future with money stolen from innocent people. I thought about Marcus, so confident in his superiority, so certain that he could manipulate and control everyone around him. "Yes," I said. "I'll do it." "There's something else, Claire. Something you need to know before you make this decision. Final." "What?" "I did some more digging into your husband's personal life. The affair with Jessica? It's not his first. There have been others over the years, many others, and each time he's used client funds to finance the relationships. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Years of wondering why I wasn't enough, why our marriage felt so hollow, why Marcus seemed so distant. It all made sense now. I hadn't been competing with work or ambition. I'd been competing with a parade of other women, all funded by stolen money. "How many?" I whispered. "At least 5 that I could document going back 7 years. Probably more. Claire, you've been living with a sociopath, a man who's been systematically lying to you, stealing from his clients, and destroying lives without a moment's conscience." That night, I sat in my kitchen where this journey had begun, staring at the evidence spread across the table. Bank records, photographs, client files, Marcus's handwritten ledger, everything needed to destroy the man who'd destroyed so many lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hope you're doing well. Jessica and I are in Aspen for the weekend. Beautiful place. You'd love it." The casual cruelty of it, the way he flaunted his new life funded by theft and betrayal, crystallized my resolve. I typed back, "Sounds wonderful. Enjoy yourselves." Then I deleted his number and called David Henderson. "Mr. Henderson? It's Claire Donovan. I need to see you first thing Monday morning. I have everything you need to bury my husband." The day of reckoning arrived on a crisp February morning, 6 months after Marcus had told me that divorce would set me free. I sat in the federal courtroom in downtown Denver, watching as my husband was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual designer suit. His perfect hair was disheveled, his confident smile replaced by the hollow look of a man who'd finally realized that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. The past month had been a whirlwind of raids, arrests, and revelations. When the FBI had finally moved on Eleanor's complaint and my evidence, they'd found even more than we'd suspected. Marcus's crimes stretched back nearly a decade and involved over $15 million in client funds. The offshore accounts, the cryptocurrency investments, the shell companies. It was all there, documented in Marcus's own meticulous records. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison. I stood with the dozen other victims who'd chosen to attend the hearing. Eleanor sat beside me, her hand steady on my arm as Marcus was brought before the judge for his initial plea hearing. Across the courtroom, I could see Jessica in the gallery, her face pale and shocked. Apparently, learning that your lover is a federal criminal tends to dampen the romance. "Mr. Donovan, you are charged with wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. How do you plead?" Marcus's attorney, an expensive criminal defense lawyer who was probably costing him his last legitimate dollars, whispered in his ear. Marcus straightened, trying to reclaim some of his old authority. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The words rang hollow in the courtroom. Everyone knew he was guilty. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, documented in his own handwriting. But Marcus had always been skilled at maintaining the illusion of innocence, even when caught red-handed. Judge Morrison set the trial date for 6 months out and addressed the issue of bail. The prosecution argued that Marcus was a flight risk, given his access to hidden offshore accounts. The defense painted him as an upstanding citizen who'd simply made some poor investment decisions. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "the defendant has shown a pattern of sophisticated financial manipulation spanning nearly a decade. He has demonstrated complete disregard for his fiduciary responsibilities and has caused devastating harm to numerous victims, many of whom are elderly and have lost their life savings. The government respectfully requests that bail be denied." Marcus's attorney stood to respond, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. "I've reviewed the case file, Counselor. The evidence of systematic fraud is extensive and compelling. Bail is denied. Mr. Donovan will remain in federal custody pending trial." I watched as Marcus's face crumbled, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. No more expensive dinners, no more weekend getaways, no more Jessica. Just a concrete cell, and the knowledge that his victims were finally getting their day in court. As the marshals led him away, Marcus caught sight of me in the gallery. For a moment, our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw shock there, and disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. The dawning realization that his naive, simple wife had orchestrated his downfall. I didn't look away. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor and I stood with David Henderson and the federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Amanda Chen, who'd built her career on white-collar crime cases. "This is just the beginning," Chen said. "With the evidence we have, we're confident of a conviction. Mr. Donovan is looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison." "What about the money?" asked Robert Chen, one of Marcus's victims. "Will we ever see our investments again?" Henderson answered. "The federal asset forfeiture laws are extensive. They'll seize everything. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, even the offshore funds. It won't cover all the losses, but it's a start." "And the divorce?" I asked. "Given the criminal charges, we can argue that all marital assets were tainted by criminal activity. You'll walk away clean, Mrs. Donovan, while Marcus will lose everything." As the group began to disperse, Eleanor pulled me aside. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about the question seriously. How did I feel? For months, I'd been driven by anger, by the need for justice, by the determination to make Marcus pay for what he'd done. Now that it was happening, now that he was facing the consequences of his actions, I felt free, I said finally. I feel free. Eleanor smiled. Good, because this isn't the end of your story, Claire. It's the beginning. She was right. Over. The following weeks, as Marcus's trial dominated the local news and his investment firm collapsed in scandal, I began to build a new life. I sold the house, which, as it turned out, was worth less than we owed on it anyway, and moved into a modest apartment in Capitol Hill. I returned to teaching, taking a position at a local high school where I could use my hard-won knowledge of financial crimes to help students understand the importance of financial literacy. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Marcus, from his federal prison cell, signed over everything without contest. There wasn't much left anyway. The government had seized most of his assets to compensate his victims. But I didn't need much. After years of living in a house built on lies and funded by stolen money, my small apartment felt like a palace. Marcus's trial began in September. I testified for 2 days, walking the jury through the evidence I'd gathered, explaining how I'd uncovered his crimes, detailing the systematic way he'd defrauded his clients. The defense tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge, but the evidence spoke for itself. Mrs. Donovan, the prosecutor asked, why did you decide to investigate your husband's business dealings? Because he told me that divorce would set me free, I answered. He was right, but not in the way he expected. The truth set me free. Justice set me free. And making sure that his victims got their day in court, that set me free most of all. Marcus was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The judge, in passing sentence, noted the extraordinary callousness of his crimes and the devastating impact on his victims, many of whom are elderly and will never recover financially from his betrayal. I wasn't in the courtroom for the sentencing. I was teaching my afternoon classes, helping students understand compound interest and investment basics, making sure they'd never become victims like Marcus's clients had been. 1 year later, I received a letter in the mail. The return address showed it was from the federal prison in Colorado where Marcus was serving his sentence. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Claire, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to write this. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, about the choices I made, about the way I treated you and so many other people. You were right. About everything. I was living a lie, stealing from people who trusted me, destroying lives for my own gain. I told myself I was building something, providing for our future, but I was really just feeding my own ego and greed. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I can't undo the harm I caused, but I want you to know that I understand now what you did and why you did it. You didn't destroy my life. I destroyed it myself. You just made sure I faced the consequences. The investigators told me about all the evidence you gathered, how methodically you documented everything, how you worked with Eleanor and the other victims to build the case against me. I have to admit, I never thought you were capable of something like that. I always saw you as simple, trusting. I was wrong about that, just like I was wrong about so many things. I heard you went back to teaching. I'm glad. You were always happiest in the classroom, and I know you'll make a difference in those kids' lives. Maybe you can teach them to be smarter than I was, to make better choices. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that you were right when you said divorce would set you free. It set us both free. You from a marriage built on lies, and me from the lies I was telling myself. Take care of yourself, Claire. You deserve all the happiness I never gave you. Marcus, I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was more like an acknowledgement, a recognition of the truth we'd both been avoiding for years. Marcus had finally seen himself clearly, and what he saw had broken something inside him that money and charm and manipulation couldn't fix. But his moment of clarity had come too late. The damage was done, the victims hurt, the trust broken beyond repair. Some lessons could only be learned in a prison cell, and some consequences couldn't be undone with words on paper. 2 years after that first devastating night in our kitchen, I stood in front of my senior economics class, teaching a unit on investment fraud and financial crimes. The students were engaged, asking smart questions, understanding the real-world applications of what they were learning. "Mrs. Donovan," asked Sarah, a bright 17-year-old in the front row, "how do people like Bernie Madoff and other financial criminals get away with it for so long?" I smiled, thinking of Marcus, of Eleanor, of all the lessons I'd learned about trust and betrayal and the importance of asking hard questions. They get away with it because people want to believe in easy answers and guaranteed returns. They prey on trust, on the assumption that successful, charming people must be honest. But the most important thing to remember is that if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And if someone tries to discourage you from asking questions about your money, that's exactly when you need to ask more questions. But how? Do you know who to trust? I thought about Marcus's perfect smile, his designer suits, his confident promises. I thought about Eleanor's sharp intelligence, David Henderson's ruthless competence, Amanda Chen's dedication to justice. You trust people who encourage your questions, not those who discourage them. You trust people whose actions match their words over time. And most importantly, you trust yourself, your instincts, your intelligence, your right to understand what's happening with your own life and your own money. After class, I walked to my car through the early spring sunshine, thinking about how different my life looked now compared to 2 years ago. The suburban house was gone, replaced by a cozy apartment filled with books and plants and the kind of peace that came from living honestly. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by comfortable teacher outfits that reflected who I really was, rather than who I thought I should be. The marriage was gone, replaced by genuine friendships and the deep satisfaction of meaningful work. Was making half the money I'd made as Marcus's wife, living in a space 1/4 the size, driving a car that was older and less impressive. By every external measure, I'd stepped down in the world. I'd never been happier. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Coffee tomorrow? I have news about the Victim Compensation Fund." I typed back, "Absolutely. Same place? See you at 10. Eleanor." Had become not just an ally, but a true friend, one of several relationships that had grown out of the ashes of my old life. The other victims had formed a tight-knit support group, bound together by shared experience and the satisfaction of seeing justice done. We met monthly, sometimes to discuss practical matters like the ongoing asset recovery process, sometimes just to celebrate how far we'd all come. That evening, I sat in my apartment grading papers and listening to jazz, a luxury I'd never allowed myself during my marriage. Marcus had hated jazz, called it pretentious noise. Amazing how many small freedoms I'd given up without even realizing it. As I worked, I thought about the letter from Marcus, still sitting in my desk drawer. Part of me wondered if I should write back, if there was value in responding to his attempt at reconciliation. But what would I say? That I forgave him? I wasn't sure I did, or if forgiveness was even the point. What I felt wasn't forgiveness so much as closure. Marcus had been a chapter in my life, an important one that had taught me valuable lessons about strength and resilience, and the danger of trusting appearances over actions. But he was a chapter that was finished now, filed away with all the other experiences that had shaped me into who I was becoming. The woman I was now wouldn't have fallen for Marcus's charm in the first place. She would have asked harder questions, demanded real answers, trusted her instincts when something felt wrong. She would have seen through the facade to the hollow man beneath. But then again, The woman I was now existed because of everything I'd learned from that relationship, including its spectacular failure. Marcus had been both my greatest mistake and my most valuable teacher, showing me by negative example what I really wanted from life and love. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Sarah, my college friend who'd supported me through the divorce. "Hey, stranger," she said when I answered. "How are you doing?" "Good. Really good, actually. Just grading papers and thinking about life. Dangerous combination. Listen, I know this might be weird to bring up, but there's someone I'd like you to meet. A friend of mine from the hospital. He's a doctor, recently divorced, has kids. Really nice guy, very genuine. I thought maybe you two might hit it off." A year ago, the suggestion would have terrified me. The idea of dating, of trusting someone new, of opening myself up to potential hurt, it would have been unthinkable. But now, "Tell me about him," I said. "His name is David. He's an emergency room physician, works crazy hours but loves what he does. His ex-wife left him for her personal trainer. Very cliché, but it hit him hard. He's been single for about 2 years now, focused on his kids and his work. But he's ready to try again. And honestly, Claire, I think you two would really connect." "What makes you think that?" "Because he's real. No pretense, no games, no hidden agenda. What you see is what you get. After everything you've been through, I thought you might appreciate that." I considered it. The old Claire would have made excuses, claimed she wasn't ready, insisted that she needed more time to heal. But I was learning that healing didn't mean hiding from life. It meant engaging with it from a place of strength rather than fear. "Okay," I said. "Set it up. Coffee, somewhere public, low pressure." "Really? You're sure?" "I'm sure. Marcus told me that divorce would set me free, and he was right. I'm free to make better choices now, to trust my judgment, to build something real with someone who deserves it." After we hung up, I returned to my papers, but my mind wandered to possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider in years. What would it be like to be with someone honest? Someone who encouraged my questions instead of discouraging them? Someone who saw my intelligence as an asset rather than a threat? I didn't know, but for the first time in years, I was excited to find out. The next morning, I met Eleanor at our usual coffee shop in Cherry Creek. She was already there when I arrived, looking elegant as always in a cream-colored blazer and pearls. But there was something different about her expression, a satisfaction that went deeper than her usual sharp intelligence. "You look like the cat that ate the canary," I said, sitting down with my latte. "Better. I look like the investigator who just got justice for her clients." She slid a folder across the table. "The asset forfeiture process is complete. Final victim compensation numbers." I opened the folder and scanned the documents. The numbers were better than anyone had dared hope. Between Marcus's seized assets, the life insurance policies that had been purchased with fraudulent funds, and the cooperation agreements with the financial institutions that had unknowingly facilitated his crimes, the victims were recovering nearly 60% of their losses. "Eleanor, this is incredible. Mrs. Patterson is getting back almost everything she lost. And Mr. Chen will be able to retire with dignity after all. It's not perfect. We can't give people back the years of worry, the sleepless nights, the stress of wondering how they'd survive. But it's justice, as close to it as we could get." I thought about all the hours we'd spent building the case, all the evidence we'd gathered, all the risks we'd taken to make sure Marcus faced consequences for his actions. It had been worth it, not just for the money, but for the principle. Bad people needed to face bad consequences, and good people deserved protection from predators who would exploit their trust. "There's something else," Eleanor said. "I've been thinking about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been retired for too long, and this case reminded me how much I miss the work. I'm thinking about starting a consulting firm, helping other fraud victims, working with attorneys and law enforcement to build cases against financial criminals, and I'd like you to consider joining me. The offer caught me completely off guard. Eleanor, I'm a teacher. I don't know anything about running an investigation business. You know more than you think. You uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme with no training and minimal resources. You coordinated with multiple victims, built relationships with law enforcement, organized evidence that led to a federal conviction. Those are exactly the skills this work requires. I stared at her, processing the implications. Leave teaching? Start over in a completely different field? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd need training. Real training in investigation, techniques, evidence gathering, legal procedures, all of which can be arranged. Claire, you have something that can't be taught. The ability to see through lies, to understand people's motivations, to build trust with victims who've been betrayed. Those are the most important qualifications for this work. I thought about my students, how much I loved teaching them about financial literacy and critical thinking. But I also thought about the dozen other Marcus Donovans out there, the victims, who didn't have an Eleanor Fitzgerald to help them, the crimes that went undetected because no one knew how to look. Can I think about it? Of course, but don't think too long. There's a case in Colorado Springs, a retirement home administrator, who's been embezzling from residents' accounts. The family suspect something, but don't know how to prove it. They need help, and they need it soon. That afternoon, I sat in my classroom after the students had gone home, looking out the window at the mountains in the distance. 2 years ago, I'd been a suburban housewife whose biggest concern was whether the grocery budget would stretch to cover organic vegetables. Now I was being offered the chance to become a professional fraud investigator, to make a career out of the skills I'd developed in desperation and refined through necessity. The old Claire would have been terrified by such a dramatic change. The new Claire found herself seriously considering it. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Coffee date confirmed for Saturday at 2 p.m. Starbucks on 16th Street. His name is David Mitchell. He'll be wearing a blue sweater and reading a medical journal. Don't overthink it, just be yourself. I smiled, typing back, "Thanks, and Sarah? I might have some news of my own soon." As I packed up my things and prepared to leave for the day, I realized that Marcus had been right about one thing. Divorce had set me free. But not in the way he'd intended. He'd thought he was freeing himself from a burden, discarding a wife, who no longer served his purposes. Instead, he'd freed me from a life built on lies, from the exhausting work of pretending that hollow charm was the same as love, from the small compromises that had slowly eroded my sense of self. The Claire, who walked out of that classroom, was someone Marcus had never known, someone he'd never bothered to discover. She was stronger, smarter, more confident, and more capable than the woman who'd sat in that kitchen 18 months ago, staring at credit card statements and wondering how her life had gone so wrong. She was free to make her own choices, pursue her own dreams, build relationships based on honesty instead of manipulation. She was free to help other people find their own justice, their own strength, their own freedom from the predators who would exploit their trust. Most importantly, she was free to discover who she really was when she wasn't trying to be what someone else needed her to be. Marcus had told me that divorce would set me free, and he'd been absolutely right, just not in the way either of us had expected. As I drove home through the Denver streets, past the downtown office where Marcus used to work, past the suburban neighborhoods where we'd once planned to grow old together, I felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the fear, the anger, all of it had been necessary to burn away the illusions and reveal the truth underneath. The truth was that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, smarter than anyone had given me credit for, and capable of far more than I'd ever dreamed. The truth was that justice was possible, that bad people could face consequences, that victims didn't have to remain victims forever. The truth was that sometimes the best revenge was simply living well, building something real and meaningful from the ashes of something false and destructive. Marcus had wanted to set himself free, but in the end, he'd only succeeded in setting me free. And that freedom had turned out to be the most valuable gift anyone had ever given me, even if it hadn't been given willingly. The story was far from over. There were new cases to investigate, new victims to help, new relationships to build, new dreams to pursue. But the foundation was solid now, built on truth instead of lies, on strength instead of dependency, on hope instead of fear. I was finally, truly free. And I intended to make very good use of that freedom. The brass nameplate on my office door read, Fitzgerald and Associates, Financial Crime Investigation. Below it, in smaller letters, Claire Donovan, Partner. I still got a thrill seeing my name there, even after 3 years of building the most successful fraud investigation firm in Colorado. My phone buzzed with a text from David. My David, the emergency room physician Sarah had introduced me to 4 years ago, who'd become my husband 6 months earlier in a simple ceremony that focused on promises we actually intended to keep. Running late tonight, emergency surgery. Don't wait up, but save me some of that pasta you're making. Love you. I smiled, typing back. Already set aside. Good luck tonight. Love you too. Through my office window, I could see Eleanor at her desk, silver hair gleaming under the afternoon sun as she reviewed case files. At 78, she showed no signs of slowing down, and her reputation for getting justice for fraud victims had only grown over the years. My computer chimed with an email from Amanda Chen, the federal prosecutor who'd put Marcus away. She'd moved to Washington to head up the white-collar crime division, but we still collaborated on cases regularly. Claire, just got word that Marcus Donovan was denied parole again. He won't be eligible for another review for 5 years. Thought you'd want to know. Hope you're well. Amanda. I felt a brief moment of something. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not sadness either. Just a quiet acknowledgement that consequences, once set in motion, continued to unfold whether we paid attention to them or not. Marcus was serving his time, paying the price for his choices. I'd moved on to building something positive from the wreckage he'd left behind. My assistant knocked on my door. Mrs. Mitchell, the Henderson family is here for their appointment, the buy. Hendersons were potential clients, an elderly couple who suspected their financial advisor of embezzling from their retirement accounts. It was a story I'd heard dozens of times now, with variations. The trusted professional who exploited that trust, the victims who blamed themselves for being deceived, the family members who didn't know how to help. Send them in, as I prepared, to meet with yet another family whose lives had been disrupted by financial predators. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The scared, broken woman who discovered her husband's infidelity had evolved into someone who helped other people fight back against the predators who would exploit their trust. Marcus had been wrong about many things, but he'd been absolutely right about one. Divorce had set me free. Free to discover my own strength, free to build a career that mattered, free to love and be loved by someone who saw my intelligence as a gift rather than a threat. Sometimes the best revenge really was living well. And I was living very, very well indeed. The nameplate on my door proved it. The wedding ring on my finger proved it. The grateful letters from clients whose lives we'd helped restore proved it. Most of all, the woman I saw in the mirror each morning proved it. Confident, capable, unafraid of asking hard questions or demanding real answers. She was everything. Marcus had never expected me to become, everything I'd never known I could be. She was free, and she intended to stay that way.